This is the second installment in our scarf jointing series. Last week we looked at a scarf cutting jig. This week we're doing the sanding jig. And next time we're doing the gluing jig for quick, accurate cuts. The series where we're making an accurate and repeatable scarf cut. Last time we made the cut on some scrap. We ended up with a headstock section and a neck section. This time around we want to sand that cut because, as you can see, there are a few little sawtooth lines in the workpieces. The sanding jig consists of two elements. We've got our sanding block and the jig itself, which is clamped down to the workbench. Some of you don't have CNC machines, and so I'm including the plans for free down in the description below. Help yourself. For those of you that do have a CNC machine, I'll also include a couple of formats of 2.5D CNCing strategy for this project. They're also free. You can take the plans, which are in a PDF format, to your local print shop and get them printed out at 100%. Then stick them to your plywood sheets and carefully cut around them. Then follow the instructions on the blueprints or just follow along with the video. The basis of the jig is these three shapes. Our first job, once we've got the three shapes, is to mark them out so that the two ramps are parallel with one another. This is very important because when you put your sliding sanding block in between them, you don't want it to jam. Because this is the first time that I've tried making this jig, right there you're going to see me doing little customizations as I go. So in this case, I'm cutting the base to allow for easier clamp access. I'm not sure why I'm being so precise here. There's really no need for it at all, but here we go. Drawing a very precise line and then reflecting it over to the other side. Now the base has been recut, and I'm just testing now to see how the clamp access is working, and it looks good. You might remember this little guy from the last episode. I'm just putting him next to the ramp of this jig and using my finger to check. Yes, that feels exactly like 13 degrees to me. Just want to take a minute to draw in some smooth curves around the edges of the base, and then I can take it over to the spindle sander and round those edges off. It's time to fix the ramps onto the base, so I'm starting off with a line of glue and a little sprinkle of salt to keep it in place when I flip it over. I'm lining up the edges of the ramp with the edges of the jig, and because I cut this one out on the CNC, I know that it's dead square. These cheap squeezy clamps can often pull work out of alignment, so I just want to check it again and finish it off with a few pin nails. Then I repeat the process for the ramp on the other side. If you're wondering why this piece of plywood is interrupting the shot, that's going to be my spacer block. I've just popped it out again and I'm putting in a couple of cardboard spacers. That spacer block is going to live on the bottom of the sanding block, so it's important to give a little bit of wiggle room so it doesn't get stuck. Obviously, it's critically important that you line your two ramps up so that they're both hitting the back of the base at exactly the same place. Otherwise, you're going to have a wiggly ramp and you're going to have wiggly scarf cuts. After that glue is dried, we can take the opportunity to ram in a few more pin nails just to give it a bit of extra strength. So these are the parts that we have so far, the base and ramps and the spacer block, and I'm making another block that's the same length and slightly wider than the spacer block, and I'm marking it at both ends and drawing a center line down the middle. Then I do the same thing on the spacer block itself, and this is obviously so that I can align them up with each other. Watch what happens when I test it there. It's obvious to me now that the spacer block was too long, so I'm just marking it out now with my little 13-degree gauge, cutting it at the bandsaw, and giving it a bit of a smooth off. There's still a little bit of bumpiness in the jig though, so this time I'm going to take a little bit off here. I did it off camera and you can see that it's operating nice and smoothly now. From here I spread some cyanoacrylate glue and put my strip of sandpaper down on there, give it a good press and cut around the edges. So imagine with me that this neck outline shows us where our neck piece is going to be situated. Our scarf cutting jig would have cut the head off the neck portion of our neck blank. So we can arrange the neck portion of our neck blank and clamp it in. Here's the sanding block that we made earlier. After a couple of minutes of sanding, the result is this. I used quite rough sandpaper, so I'm going to go over it again with some higher grit. So that's our pretend neck blank done. Now for the headstock. I've run into another problem. I can see where the transition is between the scarf cut and the headstock, that the clamps aren't quite gripping it. So I'm just going to mark out a little bit more access on the base legs so that I can cut out those problematic areas as well. In order for the clamps to be able to reach under the jig, I think I'm going to need to extend the feet. So it's off to the plywood, and here's how not to cut plywood with a jigsaw. I've got my shapes all laid out on the little panel I just cut out with the jigsaw, and it's off to the bandsaw to cut them all out. I'm gonna need a lot more clamps. Hi, I'm back. So here I am pointing at some things, and what that signifies is that I'm going to need to cut off a little bit more of my legs. So I'm just going to mark that out quick and dirty with an aluminium ruler, and then we'll get the Japanese fret saw onto it. That's perfect clamp access. To make the sanding blocks slide a bit better on the ramps, I'm filing off the sides a little bit, just adding a quick chamfer. Another thing that you might want to do is add some paste wax to the top of your ramps, and that will help your sanding block to slide really smoothly. So right now I'm demonstrating how you would use the jig, clamp it to the bench, clamp your workpiece into the jig. Lots of access now we've cut some holes, and sand away. That's it. On screen now is our headstock blank, which means we've sanded our headstock blank and our neck blank. So that's how I do it. Scarf cutting and scarf sanding. Precise and repeatable. Next episode, we'll be looking at this crazy jig to glue our scarf joints together. I hope to see you then.